I want to take a quick moment to kind of warn you guys that much of the discussion we're having, again, we're talking about the realities of inequality in the U.S., so it's going to be, a lot of it will be upsetting and somewhat disturbing, but we ask you all to be kind of encouraged that so many great scholars are thinking about these issues and that so many of you came here and chose to spend your day thinking about these things. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Christian, who will be leading our first panel.
So, for those that are not quite clear about it, this type of event does not happen all the time at the University of Michigan. So, this is listening to Stephen and Nakeem talk about kind of the partnerships and the event and the interest. This is rare. It's like let us all take that in. So, anybody visiting, this does not happen all the time. This is not something that is as present as we would like, but Nakeem and Stephen talked about this a long time. They pulled this together, and so I'm like in one of those like amazing moments where I'm feeling like incredibly proud and wonderful about what you all were able to pull off, and so thank you for that. I'm not going to do this. Let's applaud shit again. Let's just go. So one thing about the study of kind of discrimination and political conflict and violence, which is the broader context within which this panel takes place. One thing about studying it comparatively and globally is that you get some sense of kind of like, what's possible? And so, strangely, I actually want to start the conversation today talking about India. So there's this practice that's lasted for 4,000 years in India, untouchability, caste discrimination, whatever you'd like to kind of like refer to it as, a bunch of different labels. The people that are oppressed by this particular practice call themselves Dalits, not untouchables any longer. And that means those who are oppressed. They want to be very clear about what's going on and basically kind of who's doing it, although that's somewhat problematic for them. But the thing that was interesting about India, at independence, there was discussions about, does this practice exist? Is it there? And then the government of India is just like, yes, it does exist. Let's conduct an evaluation. And should we do something about it? They concluded yes. So think of the US, think of India. They're just like, there is a problem. It's systemic. We need to do something about it. Positive discrimination. Positive discrimination. And so, but they added a little part to it. They were just like, okay, we're going to do something, and we're going to try to do a whole bunch to try to remedy these particular problems, but we're not going to do it forever. So every 10 years, we're going to come up with an evaluation and see if we need to persist. So needless to say, since the 50s, every time they've done this evaluation, they're just like, yes, it's still here, let us continue. Yes, it's still there, let us continue. Now, what I like thinking about this, and when I first was doing work on India and saw this, I was kind of like, there was an accounting from the government, there was an evaluation from the government, and there was some effort to talk about what needed to happen on a systematic basis. Okay, that they can't resolve a 4,000-year-old problem in 50 or 60 years, okay, fine. But at least they're having the conversation. And so I'd like to think about that within the context of what we're talking about, because it should cause some pause as we think about it, because these types of events, these other America discussions, it should be happening here, it should be happening on the topics that are addressed within this particular venue, but it needs to happen more broadly. Now, some of us had some naive hope that like the state of Black America should handle that. It's like, if you've read those, you realize, no, that was not their agenda. The US federal government has not conducted such an accounting or an evaluation or an acknowledgement. And so it's basically been kind of left to a bunch of individual scholars and communities to put it together. Now, we haven't put it together yet in the sense that there's another America database. And like you could download some stuff and start asking some questions. There needs to be, because there's a bunch of research that needs to be undertaken. There is an accounting of sorts that needs to be undertaken. There is an evaluation of human rights, civil and political rights, all types of oppressive practices. All these things need to be systematically evaluated and held accountable. Now, this is not a new idea. Ever since I first heard about the political status of the Negro in the Age of FDR by Ralph Bunche. Has anyone read this? Has anyone read Gunnar Myrdal's, what's the name of that book again? The American Dilemma? So this is what he based the black parts on. He commissioned it, took it, and then Ralph published it, which is interesting in and of itself. You know, those of us that are interested in the history of knowledge. But there's a particular section on it that I thought was incredibly relevant. And so he goes, and this is about an accounting. If democracy is like as a concept, so there's human rights issues at stake, there's voting rights issues, there's a bunch of things that are at stake. Whether or not this is a democracy itself, Bunch suggests is at stake. If democracy is to survive the severe trials, and this is written in 35, 37, something thereabouts. If democracy is to survive the severe trials and buffetings to which it is being subjected in the modern world, it would do so only because it could demonstrate that it is a practical, living philosophy under which all people can live the good life most abundantly. Echoing Hakeem, actually, that was very cool to see him go in this direction. It must prove itself in practice or be discredited as a theory. Democratic nations such as our own have an obligation to all mankind to prove that democracy as a form of government, as a practical means of human relationships, is a working and workable concept. This America can do only by abandoning the shallow, vulgar pretense of limited democracy under which some are free and privileged and others are permanently fettered. The Negro, and especially the Negro in the South, already has too vivid an experience with the embryonic fascism in the very shadow of democracy. Within our own gates are found intense racial hatreds, racial ghettos, and racial differentials that saturate the political, economic, and social life of the nation. So we need an accounting. We need an evaluation. These need to be aggregated, and the very existence of the legitimacy of the polity itself is at stake. It's not some isolated thing that we're having on the side. This is about the core of whether or not we live in a democracy or don't, and why we don't, which is the separate question. I hope we will get to that today. I will make sure that we're pushing that. Now, I'll apologize up front. I've been asked to keep time, and I've been asked to do so dictatorially. So you all have 20 minutes. I will be nice with my interruptions, but there will be some. Now, I was asked to introduce these folks, but it's like, that's crazy, right? Okay, so they provided you the short bio. You can go to their web pages. Everyone is incredibly detailed. Professor Francis is at the Department of Political Science at the University of Washington. The most recent or the most relevant book to this conversation, Civil Rights in the Making of the Modern American State. Professor Barngartner, Frank, I'm not going to pretend like I don't know him or Megan, actually. Professor of Political Science at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I think the most relevant piece for this conversation is Suspect Citizens, What 20 Million Traffic Stops Tell Us About Policing and Race. And Andrea Ritchie, writer, litigator, advocate. The most relevant piece, I think, maybe, I don't know, Invisible No More, Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color. But I will let them to do what they're going to do. Megan.